All right, now before we get into the comments and all the fun stuff, the haters and the people calling for you to back up the substance of your lecture series, I really want to talk a little bit more about science, faith, and in the video you cited, they implied that your faith in God caused you to lose your objectivity, that you're not really using your scientific mind in these things. But in your entire series, you never actually used God in any of your arguments and only used science. So rather than attack you as a science denier, I don't understand why people aren't actually addressing the science, because I haven't really seen too much substance to that.
Right. They have to address the science. They just keep going back and suggesting that because I'm a believer in Jesus Christ and because I love God, it somehow makes me lose my objectivity and I can't speak about these things because they're afraid to address the science. So they keep trying to dismiss me as an individual. And all I say is address the science. I never appealed to miracles. In fact, Dave Farina appealed to miracles. He said 1,000,000 years and then this can happen. They polymerized somehow. I mean, he's appealing to miracles. I'm not. I didn't appeal to miracles. They have to address that. Now, I'll say up front, do I love Jesus more than anything else in the world? And if there's anybody who wants to hear, who's not a believer in Jesus Christ, does not believe in the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ, if you want a meeting with me, one-on-one, we'll do it by Zoom. I'll set it up. You just send me an email. If you do not believe in the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ, and you want to hear about how I came to faith in Jesus Christ, you can send me an email to tour@drjamestour.org, tour@drjamestour.org, and I'll get back to you and I'll share that with you. That's how much it means to me to tell you about how I became a believer in Jesus Christ and a firm believer in his resurrection. So that's who I am. And so if you want to know what my agenda in life is, I mean, I want to tell people about Jesus. That's true. But when I talk about science, I don't have to bring God into it or Jesus into it at all in order to explain the sophistry of origin of life research.
So, I mean, it seems to me that you're directly stating that you're being able to separate philosophy, religion, faith, and your assessment and your critique of the things in relation to the topic at hand. You're basing it purely on the known laws, restrictions, etc. of physics and chemistry in terms of the plausibility of the things that we're discussing. Is that kind of a fair, short version of what we're talking about?
That's absolutely fair. And what people who don't want to address the science that I put forth, they just bring up the other side and they try to dismiss me because they're afraid to address the science.
In line with that, let's kind of take it to kind of address one of the common talking points. I know it's been directed towards you. I've heard it myself many times. So you publicly state that you're a Christian and you believe in the physical resurrection of Jesus Christ. And we just talked about that. You've said that doesn't affect your scientific views on abiogenesis and just science in general. So I guess the question that's often raised is, okay, so if we solve the problem of abiogenesis and figure out how life did begin, isn't that just going to destroy your faith? And hey, you now recognize it's all been God of the gaps and things of that nature. What would you say to that type of person?
Yeah. So first of all, I've never used a God of the gaps argument, because I never brought God into this argument. But in any case, no, it wouldn't destroy it at all. So think about this. I've never even said that there is not a solution to the origin of life problem. All I've said is that we're clueless on it today. We don't know where it is, and the goalposts are getting further away, because the more we learn about a cell, the more we learn about its complexity, the further away the target gets. So we have no idea. So this thing that we're on the verge of doing this, it's pretty well worked out. No, we're not. We're nowhere close. It won't upset my faith at all. Once, if we figure this thing out, I'll look at it and I'll say, oh God, you're all the more magnanimous. Look at how you did it. This is wonderful. It wouldn't upset me at all. And we learn things in science. So if you were to ask a person, say, in the 1600s, how is it that when the two parents are tall, their children end up tall? When the two parents are short, their children generally end up short. How can that be? And I don't know. That it just, we had no idea. But now we learned about heredity, and then with the structure of DNA in the 1950s, we learned a lot. So does that make people love God less just because we learned about the structure of DNA and where the genetic code is stored? No, it makes us all the more amazed about how this thing happened. So it wouldn't upset my faith a bit. I mean, I love Jesus with everything, and that's not changing no matter what scientific discoveries there are. And I'm not claiming that we'll never be able to figure this thing out. It's just that we're nowhere close today.
No, that's a very fair assessment. I like the way you approach that. So let's take it. Let's step away from the science side for a moment. And why do you believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God and the necessary for your salvation?
Oh yeah. So the whole basis behind my faith is based upon that event. The event of the resurrection from the dead. This event, there's so much eyewitness account of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. He appeared to a group of women. Then he appeared to the disciples. Then he appeared to over 500 people at one time. Over a period of 40 days, he appeared to many, many people. He ate with them. He sat with them. He instructed them. He walked with them along the way. And the other thing is, these disciples, so there were 12 disciples. One killed himself, Judas, for turning in Jesus. There were 11 disciples. Of those 11, 10 of them died horrific deaths for their testimony that Jesus Christ had risen from the dead. Now, I would be willing to die for what I believe, that Jesus Christ is risen from the dead. But many people would die for what they believed. But those disciples, not just the 11, but many other people of that generation, they died not for what they believed to be true of his resurrection. They died for what they knew to be true. They saw him risen from the dead. And all they had to do was deny that he had risen from the dead, and they would have been spared. One of them was boiled in oil. Another of them was pinned down to the ground and flayed alive. That's like being pinned to the ground and have your skin peeled off like a fish. And all they had to do was deny that Jesus Christ had risen from the dead. Peter was crucified upside down. Horrific deaths and nobody dies for something they know to be a lie. So they really knew this to be true. And it wasn't just them. People were fed to lions because they would not deny that they had seen Jesus Christ risen from the dead. If you're going to believe any event of that era, any event about Caesar, you're going to believe these things about Caesar, you have to believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ, because there's more eyewitness account around this than around many of the events of that era. And this is so clear, and we have so many other documents that Jesus Christ has risen from the dead. This is an historical fact. Just as we can peg things with history. Jesus Christ has risen from the dead, and on that basis, that is the way of salvation. That's what opens up the door for me to have a relationship with the Father, for what Jesus did for me. I believe upon a historical fact that Jesus Christ has risen from the dead.
It's a very, you speak it with passion and knowledge. I find it very interesting, the number of supposed objectors to Christianity, to belief in God in general. They've taken things all the way to the extreme of saying that, well, all those eyewitnesses you just referred to, they must have been hallucinating. And the historic references, well, there's just not enough. And I don't know if we have enough qualified citations as to whether or not Christ actually existed. And I find it very interesting how, things are being taken to such an extreme of denial of, right, to kind of the point you were making about, like, if you believe in Julius Caesar, the existence of Christ is also, it's on the same playing field. And there's different aspects of historical events that have dramatically less evidence, quote unquote, than the existence of Christ, the crucifixion, the resurrection, and yet we accept them without question. It's like, oh, well, that's 100%. I mean, it's a historic fact.
Right, and it's not even the same playing field. There's so much more history around Jesus and this resurrection than many of the events of that era. And it's not just the Bible accounts. And we can't just dismiss the Bible accounts and saying that they're biased. I mean, certainly a person who loves skiing writes about skiing. And just because they love skiing, it doesn't mean that necessarily their accounts are all biased. I mean, they loved it, but it wasn't just that. We have Josephus, we have other writings, Tacitus, other writers of that day that weren't at all friendly toward Christians or toward Jesus or toward the events of that era that are documenting these things. And so there's just so many more documents around this. To people who are going to do the investigation, they will see. But most people treat the investigations just like they're treating me. They will just say a few words and then just dismiss it. And so they can stick their heads in the sand. That's fine. But this resurrection has taken place, and there are implications around that. Because Jesus has risen from the dead, there are implications around it. And if we continue to deny it in the face of all this evidence, then it's not going to go well for us. I believe in the resurrection of Jesus Christ, and I believe that the history shows the resurrection. And to those that are willing to investigate, they will surely see that Jesus Christ has risen from the dead. And it's on that I base my faith.
Well said. Well said. In line with your faith, your belief in the Almighty, and obviously the ultimate existence of the divine, does that enable you, as a scientist, does that enable you to kind of view the world through a slightly different prism than other folks, let's say, who think we're here, there's nothing but there's no purpose, there's no ultimate cause for our existence? Do you think that affects you at all as a scientist, or is it something you kind of separate? Hey, I'm going to turn off my faith switch as you approach, or are you similar to, you try to approach things more like Isaac Newton, for example, who said that, hey, there must be the divine creator. I'm going to seek out the structure that exists through the divine mind.
Oh, I don't turn off my faith. My faith is always there. As I come in and daily do my work, when I don't understand something, I will often bow in prayer and say, Lord, give me understanding. The Bible says the light and the darkness are the same to God. So, oh Lord, give me understanding, because you see in the darkness when I can't see. And I pray to God that he gives me understanding. I really do. And I seek God. I cannot translate that into a written article. I just have to talk about what we see on the scientific facts. But I live very much my Christian faith here at my work all the time. I believe God. I believe it's true. I do look at the world through a different facet than an unbeliever would look at the world. And I see God in this. When my child comes running to me, when my children were small, and we were building a synthetic brain for DARPA. We called it the synthetic brain, and they told us to change the name to a molecular computer because they didn't want the bad press. And then they had a whole program on the synthetic brain. But making little AND gates and OR gates and half adders, just little simple things from a disordered array of molecules. Well, here you have these molecules in their head, and we don't know how these things are mapped out, but his brain is still using it. And so I was learning from that how we could give voltage pulses into this synthetic brain of a disordered array of molecules and firing this into something useful. We didn't have to know the order. So I get inspiration from thinking about how God might have done these things. It's just amazing. I love walking with God and knowing him and being able to look at things and see in it and see the understanding. I know why carpet fibers are stiff like they are. You can pull out one carpet fiber and it'll stand up that high, and it's only like tiny thin little thing, yet it can stand. How does it do that? I know, because I understand the chemistry that goes into making these polyester fibers or nylon fibers. I know why you can run your car into a tree and the car is demolished and the tree's just staying there, because I understand what happens when you have a lot of hydrogen bonds between these carbohydrate strands, and this happens. And so as a believer in God, I can praise God for that. And as a scientist, I have a much greater understanding. So I think as a believer, I have a greater ability to appreciate the scientific world and just praise God for it. And even more, and as a scientist who's a believer, a much greater ability to appreciate the world than someone who's just merely a believer and not a scientist. God is amazing on what he's done. It is so good to walk with God. I love him and I love his son, Jesus Christ, more than anything else in the world.
That's you can hear the passion in your voice, Dr. Tor. It's well said. I can only imagine somebody with your knowledge and intellect, as you're trying to explain this to the rest of it, the vision you're able to see. I know the lower level of knowledge that I have and the impact it's had on me, especially over the last decade, as I've really dove into trying to understand more of these underlying principles. It strikes me every time I walk outside the door. I can only imagine what it's like for you with your even greater level of understanding.
And as I read the Bible, so there's a guy in the Bible in Exodus chapter 31. His name is Bezalel. Bezalel was the man whom Moses commissioned to build the tabernacle. And God says in Exodus chapter 31, verse 2 and 3, I have called by name Bezalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, of the tribe of Judah. And I have filled him with the Holy Spirit. And I've given him wisdom and knowledge and understanding in all craftsmanship. That's the first man in the Bible filled with the Spirit of God, was a craftsman. And then you read, God says, I know his grandfather, I know his father, and I know him, and I'm going to fill him with the Spirit of God. I say, Lord, if you can fill a craftsman with the Spirit of God, how about filling a chemist? And it says you gave him wisdom, you gave him knowledge, and you gave him understanding in all sorts of craftsmanship. And then you read what he could do. He could work in gold, in silver, and in bronze, not just one metal, but all metals. He could work in stone cutting and in stone setting. He could work in wood, in fabric, and in perfuming. And he had the ability to teach it. And this is why I say, Lord, make me like Bezalel. Make my students like Bezalel. And then boom, one discovery after another. This is going to infuriate scientists. But I'm just telling you, I pray. The Bible says in James chapter 4, you do not receive because you do not ask. So the main reason we do not receive answers to prayers is because we flat out don't pray. And I pray. And this is why when you asked me in the beginning, how do I attribute all of these inventions and all of these companies? And I say, it's the grace of God. And I pray for these. Now, I write my papers. There's never a reference to God in my scientific papers. But it's dripping with glory to God as I write that thing, dripping with glory to God.
That's truly, that definitely strikes me, Dr. Tor, as I'm listening to you. One of the thoughts that I've had, the more I've learned about a lot of the fundamentals and the discoveries of the principles of those fundamentals, I've been very struck by the reality that the majority of the underlying foundational necessities and principles have almost all have been realized and discovered by people who were searching for what we're talking about now, and operating from the perspective that there must be the underlying logic, there must be the underlying structure. I just have to go find it. And I found it very interesting that since let's just say the denial of God has gained such dramatic dominance in modern academia, at least in Western civilization, we've discovered so many different ways to apply those pre-discovered principles into all sorts of new technologies and different things, but we haven't really been discovering new fundamentals. And I honestly wonder how much of that is due to as many folks aren't looking for the other amazing secrets that God has woven into our existence for us to find. And because they're not looking for them, therefore they're not being found. Just as you said, if you don't pray, why would you expect your prayer to be answered? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does. I mean, fundamentals are hard to find. I mean, true fundamentals, there's a limited number of them, and they're hard to find. But yeah, I mean, I can't disagree that if we sought God all the more and prayed to him, that we would discover more. And John, it is so much fun knowing God, knowing his son, and being a scientist. I just tell you, I mean, if you have listeners that are young people thinking about being a scientist, I tell you, if you love the Lord, it is so rewarding to be a scientist, to uncover things that people have never seen before. We do it all the time in my lab. People have never seen this before, and you uncover this and you just say, glory to God. Lord, thank you for revealing this to me. Thank you, Lord. It's just, I love what I do. I just love it.
I could imagine. It's kind of funny. I was talking with my family about this a couple of years ago. Of if I had known what I know now when I was going to college, I probably would have gone into some type of biotech, just because of the sheer fascinating. I mean, the amazing possibilities. And what I find extraordinarily fascinating is one of the reasons I've been able to find interesting stuff about the latest and greatest discoveries is whenever I hear about a new technology that humans have devised, I'm like, I bet there's a pre-existing function extraordinarily similar to that in a biological system. I'll go and Google it, and lo and behold, we will have just discovered, oh wait, turns out that insert X also exists way better and way more efficient and technologically exponentially more advanced, but the same concept, right? We've just kind of cracked the door into this new you were talking earlier, you mentioned like virtual photons for information transfer and things of that nature, and I'm just like, I read a paper on that recently. I'm just like, good night, this is insane when you think about it from a technological perspective. But before we get too distracted on that side of things, so let's circle this back around to the accusations that have been made by a variety of folks, specifically also the person that did the video that kind of catalyzed a lot of this, that you hold, because of your faith, you hold a agenda. So I guess I would have to ask you, do you have an agenda, and if so, what would it be in relation to the abiogenesis controversy, shall we say?
Right. So, I find it frustrating when people will hear scientists speak and it draws them away from faith in Jesus Christ because of inaccuracies that are put forth by the scientists. So, for example, to suggest that there's a primordial soup, that some lightning strikes, and it makes perfectly good sense that molecules formed a cell, and we got life from that. And so life is figured out, and to somehow suggest that then lessens God, and to see people become weak in their faith or deny their faith about these things. That's what makes me take this on, in the sense that, no, let's talk about the truth. Let's talk about the truth. Look, scientific advances come. Science has never shaken my faith. But I see the attack that comes forth, particularly upon young students, by some professors and by some high school teachers that put forth scientific ideas and somehow use that to belittle faith. You can talk about science, talk about what we know, but say this is a theory. This is a theory. We don't have a whole lot of facts around this theory. It's still a theory, and it shakes people's faith. And so I get concerned about this. I say, okay, let's see what's behind this. How much is behind this? And then when I start exposing this, I mean, people tell me all the time that they watch these videos and it brought them back to the faith that they had back in college that they had lost when they had taken biology classes. That some biologist is going to talk about primordial soup. Some biologist is going to talk about how cells can assemble. And that's what drew a person away from their faith. Until a few years ago, I had no idea that people were being drawn away from the faith because of that. And so I just want to expose this truth. I want to expose the truth. Because the truth is not really going to upset people. But when you expose lies, lies, you're going to draw people astray with your lies. Use the truth. And I have some of the same hesitancies about evolution. I don't speak as much about evolution. I've written about it on my website on jmtour.com. And so I've written about this sort of thing. But I have a lot of problems with that as well. And my problems with that as well is that when I speak with my colleagues, I'm talking about people who hold wholeheartedly to universal common descent, who have strong backgrounds in evolutionary science. And I speak to them and I ask them for details. I find out that the details are really weak. And people go ballistic. Oh, no, it's all there. Okay, show me the details. Share with me the papers. I want to see the chemistry. As a organic chemist, I got to see the chemistry. I don't want this black box sort of thing. I want the chemistry. I very rarely get sent the chemistry things, and they say, okay, they'll always go back to point mutation. Point mutate. Okay, so you changed you changed a nucleotide there. Okay, so you have a different base on there now. Now what? Well, then another one. Okay, and now what? And then another one. And you get one small change at a time. I said, describe that to me. Describe how there were those point mutations and how it moved in this direction without screwing something up. Let's go through this. Describe that chemistry to me. Boom, the whole thing withers. Well, if people can't explain it to me, and then people will say, oh, well, you know, it's just like the quantum mechanics argument. No, it's not like the quantum mechanics argument. You can sit down with a person and explain to them quantum mechanics, and it doesn't wither. You explain the details of quantum mechanics, it doesn't wither. You explain the details of origin of life, and you explain the details of changes of a complex system, development of a new complex system, then the details are hard. I mean, it's just hard when you start showing the details. I mean, we saw on this elucidating video how, you know, you fly over 30,000 feet, everything looks easy. But as soon as you get into the chemistry, it's hard. It's hard. So don't let these things shake your faith. I mean, I think exposing the truth is good. It's a good thing. Expose the truth on this thing. Tell them you don't know how it happened. All right, just say it. That's what I want to do. So, you know, I've never even really thought about my agenda. I mean, when I saw that video, I was like, how does he know agenda? I don't even know my agenda. I never even thought about it in that context. I just want to shine some truth on this thing. So if you want to know what my agenda is, it's to shine the truth on it. That's my agenda. I'm not hearing you. I lost the audio.
It's very interesting listening to you talk about these things and the kind of the approach that you're taking and the realization that you had about the youth being drawn away. And like you was like, it's not like you weren't paying attention, but just weren't aware of the level to which it was happening. And part of the reason I'm on YouTube is because of that exact point. And there's been multiple studies that, you know, college biology and the point you were making it's either the number one or the number two reason, depending on which study you look at, of why people lose their faith.
I had no idea.
And
this is the first time even hearing that statistic. I had no idea.
And outside of the confrontation I had with well-known atheist, the other reason I decided to engage in trying to have conversations like this one was I was watching different they call them deconstruction videos. Basically, it's a deconversion, how I lost my faith, and almost 100% of them at some point in their video, they will say, "Well, and then I went to college, and I learned that." The Bible was just totally wrong, or the Quran was wrong, whatever it is. And that there is no necessity for a creator. And then therefore, everything about religion just completely collapsed. And I realized I'd been being, brainwashed my whole life. And then, fast forward, now I'm an atheist or an agnostic at a minimum. And for me, and again, even more so for you, of just the basics of what I know about evolution and abiogenesis, I'm like, if you actually understood what we're talking about here, you would not necessarily you sure as heck wouldn't be abandoning. You might not believe in a specific God or specific religion. You might have your confidence rocked a little bit, but I highly doubt if you actually had real understanding, you would just completely dismiss everything. And I think some of this circles back around to, and this is why I think what you're doing and having the wherewithal and the courage to come out and directly issue calls to action to your peers, is I think there's plenty of your peers in a variety of these disciplines who are unaware of the level of supreme confidence that's being put forth towards the undergraduate students, for example, and high school kids, that, oh, this is all just solved. And they're taking the authority position, whether it's purposeful or not purposeful that's a different question. But it's being put forth with such confidence that the kids come out of it, well, like, I mean, this guy's the PhD. Why would I believe in terms of science? Why would I believe, my parent or whatever over the quote unquote expert? And I think, for example, off air, we were talking about Dr. Stadler. And that was one of the things for him why he wrote his original book on evolution. It was like what they didn't teach you in high school. And because he found out what was being taught to his son and was like, you've got to be kidding me. Mm-hmm. And went out and started researching it more and come to the conclusion like, hey, I'm going to write a book about this because I didn't know this and I'm a PhD doing research. So I think those kind of things I'm very interested to see. And I'm hoping that, what you've been doing and Stephen Meyer and all those different folks who all kind of over the last, really the last 20 years have really been starting to put together more coordinated efforts to like, hey, let's just put the evidence in front of people and let people reach those conclusions for themselves, but not just, either allow ourselves to be too consumed with the other part of our research, but also kind of put forth things to the average person to be able to understand. I think it's a very important factor. I just want to air my appreciation for you and what you're doing with abiogenesis and these other things. So before we get into, we're going to do a little section, folks, just for the audience to know. The next thing we're going to get into is going to be, the credibility and the reach of Dr. Tour. Before we do that, last agenda question. You kind of alluded to this earlier, that what you might be doing, spending, a good portion of your life doing in the future. Do you have any agendas as a professor, as a Christian, as a scientist that you're planning on kind of approaching as you go forward in life?
Well, we have a lot more discoveries to make in the research. So my mind is thankfully still good and still able to compete in this research area, and so we're pushing the bounds of as much science. I want to discover as much as I can, and then I'll see where this abiogenesis thing takes me. It was mainly through COVID, because I wasn't traveling so much, that I decided to do more with the Dr. James Tour channel, and before that it was just a few little things, but then with COVID, not traveling, I decided to do more. And then this thing that came out from on talking about my agenda, then that took a long time to do this. And so if this is having an impact, then I'll do more. If I don't see that it's having an impact, then I'll pull back. So it's going to depend on having an impact. I do the same thing with my research areas. If we start moving in an area and it's not really having an impact, and it's we're putting in a lot more time than it's worth, then I'll pull back and we'll work in some other more fruitful areas. So we just have to see what happens with this.
That's all. Well, it sounds like you firmly understand the concept of the pivot. That logic applies in business, research, every aspect of, hey, you got to recognize when something is beneficial, there's potential, and where to allocate resources, sounds like. Okay, so folks, next part of this interview, we're going to get into a little more detail on some interesting stuff. So you don't want to go away as we dive into the credibility and the reach of Dr. Tour. And then we will be getting into comments, critiques, and some funny stuff as well that has come out from the response from the audience to the lecture series from Dr. Tour. Now, Dr. Tour, I've had a lot of people reach out to me asking if you would be willing to have, a debate or a live stream, formal interaction with Dave Farina after all of the controversy that's come up, and how he kind of catalyzed your abiogenesis lecture series. What do you say to that? Would you be interested in having a one-on-one conversation with him if he was willing to do so?
Oh, I would love that. I mean, he seems like a fine young man. I'd love to get together with him. We'll have a live stream, so nobody's going to edit that. And I mean, we could do it many different ways. If he doesn't want to travel, he could sit where he is. I could sit where I am, and we'll have just a discussion. It doesn't even have to be a debate if he doesn't want. Just a discussion about these topics. I mean, we can go through each slide on his video and discuss that, or each slide on my video and discuss that, or however he wants to work it. I'd love to do it, but I got something even better. We can do something here at the university. I'll get a lecture hall, and he and I can be in there. We can be distanced. We can be 12 feet apart. We'll each have a podium. We'll have a film crew there. We can do it like that. We can have some people in the audience that are dispersed in the audience. I will pay. I will pay to have him fly to Houston. I'll buy his ticket to Houston, and I'll put him up either at a hotel, or if he wants, he can stay in my home. We have a guest room. He can have dinner with me and my wife and my family, and tell us all about himself. And we can discuss origin of life or any other topic as he'd like. I'll be glad to do that. If he wants to have me fly to his city, I'll pay to fly to his city, and I'll pay to stay in a hotel there and do it in his city. So absolutely, let's do that. I'd be glad to do it.
Wow, folks. So you just heard it from Dr. James Tour. He is offering to either pay for Dave Farina to fly to Houston. He will handle all the scheduling, set up a debate in one of the lecture halls there, hire a film crew to come and put it all together. Or if Dave doesn't want to fly to Houston, Dr. Tour will go to him. I think he's out in LA. Will fly out there, put himself up, and have a conversation there. Or if he doesn't want to do any of that, correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Tour, you're saying you'd be more than willing to just do a live stream if he wanted to go that route versus a face-to-face interaction. Is that a kind of a fair summation of what you're offering to Dave Farina?
Absolutely. And with those film crews, we could live stream that as well if he's worried about anybody doing any selective editing. So we could live stream any one of those venues just to make sure that there's no selective editing. And I'd be glad to do that with Dave. I mean, like I said, he seems like a fine young man. He's trying to teach the masses. Let's get any science corrected that needs to be corrected. Let's do it.
That's awesome. Well, folks, you just heard the words directly from Dr. Tour's mouth. So let's see what happens, and I'll keep you up to date on whether or not Professor Dave will accept the offer from Dr. Tour. All right, in this portion of our discussion, Dr. Tour, let's get into a little bit more detail about why you should be considered a credible and qualified expert to assess origin of life research. Now, we kind of talked about this earlier, but before I ask you some more specific questions, I wanted to, really show the audience some more about your, personal professional standing. Now, what I'm about to show you has nothing to do with putting anybody down or saying, hey, that they're not special, they don't have any credibility in themselves. This is just about, kind of putting things into context and your standing professionally in context as well. So to do that, I want to show some information on some of the more well-known names in origin of life research and their professional profiles. So for example, here, first one you're seeing here is Dr. Lee Cronin. Very well, he's considered one of the leaders, I believe, in origin of life research, and he's got an H index of 84 and has been cited 28,000 times. I mean, it's nothing to sneeze at by any stretch of the imagination. Next up, we got Nicholas Hudd. He's got an H index of 57 and has just under 10,000 citations. Next one up, Nick Lane. He's actually done some pretty cool stuff recently. Some of the papers I've read of him. He's got an H index of 37 and has, almost 7,000 citations. And then somebody who you actually have spoken very highly of, I believe he's at Cambridge now, fantastic synthetic chemist, John Sutherland. He's coming in at 31, and he's got quite a few citations as well. And then last one I wanted to show, and certainly not the least, is a Nobel Prize winner, Jack Szostak, who's been cited almost 59,000 times and has an H index of 112. Now, then last but definitely not least, let's put this in comparison to Dr. Tour. And as you can see, he's been cited over 115,000 times and has an H index of 154. And since 2015, he's been cited almost, it's 45,537 times just in the last 5 years. So it's pretty significant. And again, this is not about putting down these other researchers at all. They're highly qualified and credentialed and vastly higher rated than the majority of researchers. Before we came back into this segment, Dr. Tour and I were kind of talking about this. And the real reason I wanted to show this, and this, by the way, this was entirely my idea, was I really wanted to force the critics that I interact with on a regular basis, who who claim that Dr. Tour is not qualified and doesn't have the credentials to talk about this subject. I just want to kind of put it into perspective, and hopefully people will realize that we've got somebody like Dr. Tour is spending time with us. He's actually stepping away from things of great importance and focus and significance to share things with the rest of us and kind of for the layman. And I hope people really recognize this and also appreciate the fact that Dr. Tour is very humble about, he doesn't broadcast his standing to everybody and kind of lord it over folks. He actually does the exact opposite. And I hope people will take the time to actually research this, look it up for themselves, and realize who we're having the opportunity to speak with and the significance of why we should be actually listening to what he has to say rather than just dismissing out of hand because, oh, he's a Christian, oh, he believes in Jesus, therefore he must not actually know anything about science and have no credibility. So in line with that, Dr. Tour, let's get into a little bit more detail about, you're a synthetic chemist. You're not necessarily doing biochemistry and getting into OOL specific experiments. Can you give us a little bit more detail of how, as a synthetic chemist, you're able to analyze these things and why it's significant in relation to kind of experiments that we've been talking about?
Yeah, so organic chemists have the ability to look at chemical reactions and to assess them. And it's a very easy thing to do. And as we've discussed previously, I do this for journals all the time. I review for journals, not particularly on reactions that I have worked on myself, but we're called upon. We're called upon to do it in reviewing for proposals. We're called upon to do it in reviewing for other papers. And so the people that question my credentials and my ability to comment on the chemistry and origin of life are generally never the experts. It's the layperson that questions this, because the experts understand my abilities and my ability to comment on the chemistry that's taking place. So the experts don't question that at all. I'm called upon to teach out of textbooks that many of the reactions I've never run. There's no organic chemist that's run every reaction, even in an undergraduate organic chemistry textbook, which, by the way, is like 1,200 pages, but nobody's run all of those reactions. But we can comment upon them because we understand the chemistry, we understand the science. And if you read the chemical procedure, you can assess it. And so there's nothing special on origin of life. Absolutely nothing special. This is chemistry. This is organic chemistry. And so you can look at it and make the assessment. So again, I don't put much stock in that, John, because the people who are questioning this really don't know the area, and they're just showing that they're novices in this, because the experts don't question my ability to make these sorts of assessments that I'm making.
Well, I agree with what you're saying there in terms of your peers. What I find very concerning about this, and again, it's why I wanted to showcase this, is so many of these lay folks, the laymen, they're being convinced that you don't have the knowledge. And it's quite fascinating. I can't tell you the number of people I have, since your series came out, that I have personally interacted with that have, repeated that talking point over and over again. And it's quite striking to me in terms of the, not giving you the credibility where you are. But let's move on to another topic. So in the series, you said that, quote, abiogenesis has nothing to do with biochemistry and that it is strictly chemistry. Can you talk a little bit about, chemistry versus biology versus biochemistry and how it's, in pursuant to abiogenesis and obviously the origin of life definition?
Yeah, so biochemistry has to do with biology, and before biology starts, you have to have the molecules that you can do it with, and you have to begin to construct the molecules. This is where abiogenesis is. Before there's life, there's not biology, which is the science of life. And so we have to be able to deal with it. And this is just straight chemistry. I mean, this is actually much easier for me to make assessments upon than when I speak on evolution. So I speak a lot less on evolution. This is the origin of life that, hands down, for the organic chemist, this is where we live. You know what happens when you do synthesis for years and years and years? You understand molecules. You understand what they do and what they don't do. You understand the types of interactions that go on, what types of experiments will afford things. And you get this amazing sense on molecules and how to work with them. And you're able to read the literature and make assessments, and you're able to read the experimental sections, the sections that are actually called the supplementary material, the things that most people never even click on. To see,
is that where they're like kind of explaining the processes and kind of like the sort of the lab notebook that only people you understand? Is that a fair assessment of what you're talking about there?
Yes, it's very much like reading the lab notebook, but in a neat format of what they mixed together, and how long it was mixed together, and what pH, and all these different things. And so we can assess that. And when you see this with all this amazing complexity, you go, I wonder how that was done on an early Earth. What cave could provide an environment where this could happen? And then you start seeing this is very hard to fathom. So anyway, this is the world of the organic chemist. Again, it's not the expert that questions my ability. It's the layperson. And I don't mean to come against the layperson, not at all. I'm a layperson in every field except chemistry. So I'm not coming against that in any way. I'm just saying the experts in organic chemistry, they understand where I'm coming from. And I don't think the questions are from them.
That definitely makes sense. Now, is it necessary to propose an alternative view to our current understanding of abiogenesis to show that an understanding of abiogenesis doesn't work? Like, the reason I'm asking that question is very often people say, oh, well, unless you put forth an entire model to explain it, you can't claim that abiogenesis is, not possible or implausible or improbable because you haven't put forth another model.
Right.
In your area, as a scientist, as a researcher, would somebody actually, if somebody said that, like, oh, well, you can't claim that this reaction can't happen because you haven't figured out how it could happen, would anybody take that seriously? I'm talking about on the chemistry level.
Not in my world. So what we teach our students is that if you want to show the mechanism, you don't have to come up with a new mechanism to shoot down an existing mechanism. If the facts don't hold up for that existing mechanism, boom, you dismiss that mechanism. It doesn't work. They don't say, hey, no, you can't dismiss that until you come up with an alternative. Not at all. That's not the way that we teach science. So just because I don't have an answer for abiogenesis does not mean that I can't take down the hypotheses that are there, the suggestions that are there. I mean, if the facts are not fitting the hypothesis, then we just yank that thing down. So in my world, this is the way we teach students how to do science, actually.
As a professor, and I assume that you have many grad students that come to you and pitch different ideas for them to go down the rabbit holes and do their dissertations on. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, a new student, they're put on an existing project. I don't like to give a new student too much reins because they end up hanging themselves. But as they get more advanced, they'll suggest things to me. They say, hey, I saw this, I want to try that. And they have to convince me, not totally, but to the point where I'll say, okay, I'll give you 2 weeks on that. See what you can get. Or I'll give you a month, not more than that, because you end up going down that rat hole and you end up spending a lot of time. I try to get my students out in 4 years. There's some groups that keep people 5, 6, 7 years. I don't. I try to get them out in 4 years. So I push them hard, and we don't spend a lot of time doing things that look unfruitful. Now, we will spend time on things if there's indication that we're heading in a direction that's going to be fruitful. And then there's other times we just, we're working on something and then boom, we see something. We say, wow, that's big. We got to go after that. That does happen actually quite a lot.
So part of the reason I was asking that question is, what you guys are, I guess not everything, but a huge portion of what your teams are researching is, practical application of different stuff, right? And that's proven beyond all doubt with all the things that have been patented, right? If somebody who's a little bit further up the ladder under your group came and said, hey, I want to research something that has failed over and over again. I don't really have any remotely plausible explanation of how to solve the problem, and then wanted you to, focus some research money on it. in most scenarios, not only you, but would the vast majority of your peers in your same position be like, why would we go down this path? I mean, is that a fair kind of outsider perspective to be like, wait a minute, why would you do this?
No, most people would say no. No, we're not going to do that. I'd say no. I mean, and that's, I see what you're getting at. In Origin of Life, they keep making many, many molecules that without having, in using non-prebiotic like conditions, where they do this relay synthesis that I talked about. They have very low yields, and then they'll scale it up another way, or they'll buy it and go on to the next step. And they're not controlling the absolute stereochemistry. So we're not making homochiral material. And they keep thinking that this is some great advance, and it's not. It's a waste of time. There are some fundamental problems that are worth going after, as are defined in the video, and these are not one of them. So I think it's a waste of money. And I do. I mean, so am I supposed to keep quiet? I mean, how dare he, make comments about another field? No, I mean, that's what we're here for. I'm critiquing it. What do you want me to make the comment on your proposal? So it doesn't get funded? I'll tell you outright. And you want me to hide behind the anonymity of a proposal that I'm reviewing? I'll tell you outright. I think it's a waste of time and money to do that sort of thing. Let's get at some of the fundamental problems. Address the Leventhal problem, or Leventhal 2.0, the interactomes. I mean, these are big fundamental problems. How are we going to solve these sorts of things? So there's a lot to work on in Origin of Life that I think that would take us much further.
One of the things that really struck me in your series was, the whole principle or concept of relay synthesis, and how people just aren't really appreciating the level to which that's being applied in the supposed, we've made this new advancement, we're that much closer to understanding the problem. And then you made the point about, I forget which one it was, on, the EE was only some minuscule amount, and then you're breaking down from the lab notebook, from the supplemental stuff that you researched, went down the rabbit hole in. It's like, wait a minute, this has no significance in any other kind of experiment. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming if you had that kind of yield, it would be considered a failure. Is that a fair?
Yeah. If you're doing a natural product synthesis and you run out of material, you have to bring up more starting material. And if for some reason you're doing a relay synthesis, you have to explicitly say that we ran out of material here, so we bought it, and now we're going to carry this on to the. You explicitly tell people that this. I couldn't make it from beginning to end. I had to play this game. But they will play that game at one step after another, and not even mention it. And you don't understand that until you read the supplemental.
And I'm assuming the point you were making about it having to be detailed in any other context is it for repeatability, of like to actually be able to recreate the experiments, or to have understanding of additional factors that are required? Is that?
No, that's important, but you're trying to say how something could be made. I mean, the whole basis behind the whole argument is how I went from this small molecules, how I went from methane over to a cell. But then at each step, you run out of material. So that couldn't have been a viable process on an early Earth. So the whole game ends right there. Game over right there. And but it just carries on. It just carries on. So in this field, more than in any other field, it's important not to play that game, because you're trying to describe how you can get from here all the way over to here. The mass transfer problem is a killer. They keep saying this. How do you go from, even if you had a kilo of material, how do you get over to here? Within 3 steps, the kilo can be 1 milligram if you don't have good yields. So this is a big problem.
From a kilo? Like you started with a kilo? Wow. Okay.
Yeah. If you have a lousy yield, sure. And that's why you don't use the whole kilo at a time. You take small amounts, you try it, and then you optimize on that, and then you take the next small amount of that and you try it, and then you bring up more material on something that's proven. Early Earth could never do that. Early Earth never had that luxury. And boy, the things that they never put upon themselves that, but they'll put it upon an early earth. It's mind-boggling. It's just so interesting. And the people who get this, John, are the people in my field. I mean, they get it, they see it, they see what I'm saying, and it just resonates with them. And what I tried to do in that series was to explain it to the layperson, to feel what I feel, to feel what the expert feels when they read these procedures. That's what I tried to display.
Let's talk about that. I know you've mentioned, there's different folks who have your peers that have talked to you in private. They don't want to come public. And I heard through the grapevine that there may be somebody, we don't have to talk about names, that may be wanting to kind of address some of your points in relation to, these things that have been talked about in the Dave Farina video and such. Do you think that they're aware of all of the things that have been, you pointed out about that were complete misconceptions or misinterpretations of the abiogenesis research? Do you think they know about that, or they do and are still trying to counter a lot of these points?
Well, look, a lot of people there were a lot of people that have written to me and said that they saw the emails and they said, I'm a PhD chemist in industry and I do this or that. And they were really praiseworthy. I didn't get zero. I got zero people writing to me that were chemists that saying I got, in fact, nobody sent me an email saying I got it all wrong, all right? All the people that were experienced, they said, you nailed it. I mean, they've wondered about the same thing. They've read this thing, they've seen the sophistry, they wondered about the same thing. And so I've gotten a lot of feedback, and it's interesting. So that I have gotten some feedback. For example, that there's this group of Benner in Florida that is going to try to contest some of the things that wants to work with Dave Farina. And I would just say, I mean, that Brennan group is a great group. I mean, he's a real synthetic chemist. I mean, I know that he worked for R.B. Woodward early on in his career, in the beginning of his career, and then R.B. Woodward died and he transferred to another person. But I would encourage you, if you want to take the side of that sort of thing, watch Dave Farina's video. Watch his video, and you want to do a critique, first do a critique on his video, and then come back to my video and take a look. But and these things that you might want to come with, say you want to come with Jerry Sponner's work, where you blast these things with a laser, or you blast it with a proton beam or something, and you get these molecules forming. Really think about that before you put that forth as an explanation. And I'll tell you why. Because if you generate 8 different products of all different stereochemistries, you got to somehow figure out how you're going to do chemistry on those. Remember, there is no separation unless you can make those beyond a nanogram and take those and start doing chemistry with those. That's not going to get you there. So I just encourage you. You make sure that you have everything buttoned up, because once it hits YouTube, you can't take this thing back. And other people, I'll come forth and critique that too. So if you're going to critique the video, put forth some references. As you know, John, every introduction to every one of my episodes is I said, look, if there's no way that I got everything right, no way. So come to me with a reference and I'll get this thing corrected. I think from what people have shown me, there's one actual reference that's a scientific paper. There were a couple of references that were news articles, but maybe one reference that was a scientific paper. And certainly I can address that. So you would think if there were that many problems with it, I would have heard by now, but I got a whole lot of positive feedback. And I'll tell you right from the beginning, there are things that surely I wish I had said differently and explained differently. So for example, there were things like I said that there would be no codon. Well, I meant no usable series of codons. Any three bases are going to define a letter, but you don't know where that word stops. You don't know where it starts, and it's just a bunch of gibberish. But yeah, any three bases in the nucleotide are going to define a codon. I mean, there's little things like that. I said, well, if it's not ribose, it's not RNA. Well, you could have an enantiomer of that. Yeah, it'd be the enantiomer of RNA, but very little things. So I haven't seen any major thing. But if there are big, credible groups that want to come at this, man, I invite it. I hope Origin of Life groups watch my video and stop saying, oh, well, we don't know, so Tour says it must be a miracle. I never said that. You're going to have to put a timestamp on that. If you're going to say Tour said this, put a timestamp on it, because if you don't, this is not like literature. You're going to get called out on YouTube. There's eagle-eyed people that are going to say, where did Tour say that? Where'd you get the timestamp? They're going to call you out. This is a very unforgiving world if you want to enter the YouTube world of putting out this sort of thing. This is a lot less forgiving than your published papers. And so you get that right, and then think about what you're putting out there. Think about exactly what I said, and what I said is wrong, not what you presume I might be getting at. What did I say? And hold me to the facts as it was this day. Maybe in 10 years, we'll have other examples of RNAs making whole copies of RNAs and say, well, Tour said, Tour said that 10 years ago. I'm assessing the literature to where it is based on what I know and where it is today. And so you got to think about these sort of things. But any big credible group on Origin of Life want to stand behind Dave Farina's video, more power to you. You take Dave Farina's video and you stand behind that. Boy, I'd love to see that. I would love to see that. You want to critique my video? I invite it. I've invited it from the beginning. I said, I'm not going to get it all right. Let's get it right. If my video can be improved by your input, let's do it. Bring it forward. Improve it. Let's get the Origin of Life people coming on for the whole world to see. No more obscure papers that the world doesn't see, and then you get this translation into some textbook and make it as if we figured this out, or you tell some press article that this is a major step when it's not. Get it on YouTube and let them see it. Go ahead, do it. I invite it. Boy, I want it. I would love to see the Origin of Life people critique my video, but you got to take the timestamps and say what I said and critique it. That would be great. All I ask you to do is first critique Dave's, because that one's going to keep you busy. That one keeps you really busy. And then critique mine.
Dr. Tour, I know I could tell in the lecture series, there were different points where you were restraining yourself, shall we say, on response and trying to be very diplomatic on things. But that for those who haven't seen the series, go watch, and if you pay attention, you'll notice that Dr. Tour was definitely trying to be nice. I
was trying to be nice, and I'll tell you, John, there were things that my pastor called me. He says, Jim, I really suggest you refilm this. This it's just too hard. And I had people holding me down.
Well, I'll say one of the funniest lines in the entire series was when you said, I'm paraphrasing here, but you said, my fellow synthetic chemist, I know that you're getting back up off the floor after you just fell out of your chair. I know, because I did too.
Yeah, I mean, when there's a claim making any biomolecule is easy. Oh man, I think this is such a joke. Making any biomolecule is, there's whole areas of natural product synthesis where people slave away. They'll put in 40 person years to try to make a natural product. And any biomolecule is easy to make. I mean, statements like that, that's why I tell Origin of Life research, before you align yourself with the Farina video, please watch it. Watch what you're getting in bed with here. It's a mess. It's an absolute mess.
One of the things I find extraordinarily fascinating about that concept that you're talking about right now, that's easy to make, is something like, or such as, we know the sequence of X, polypeptide or whatever. We can't recreate it without, ribosomes and different other enzymes and such. Like, we can't do it. And we know the order they have to be in. or we might be able to, but it's extraordinarily complex and hard. And I'm just using that as an example. And I know there's other things that are even more complicated than what I'm talking about right now. And it always fascinates me. I've had this conversation with researchers before. They're like biochemists, and I'm like, I've asked them directly. So can you do it if you don't have one of your machines, or you don't have other enzymes to stitch things, ligases and such to stitch things together? Could you do it? And I had a very entertaining interaction with one for about 20 minutes. And he finally, after telling me I didn't know what I was talking about, I was totally wrong, he was published, et cetera, he finally conceded. Well, yeah, if I didn't have all of these things, then you're right, I wouldn't be able to do it.
Yeah, but I'll even give him his machines. Remember, I told you 100 were an enzyme. I mean, look at the impurities. Beyond that, you're going to use some bacterial system to do this. So you're going to have to go into a cellular system to make it. You're going to have to go into a biologically derived system to make it. Even with our machines, we can't do it. That's why I said, you could go through my video and find this little thing. That's why I said at the end, I'll give it to you. You want the small molecules? I give it to you. You need it in chiral form? I give it to you. Oh, you need them polymerized too? Okay, I'll give it to you. Oh, you need the sequence? Okay, I'll give that to you too. Now assemble a cell. And be like, I don't know what to do.
Right, and one of the awesome analogies you used was all the car parts. But heck, even if you have them all, if you don't have even if you had the directions, the vast majority of people couldn't put it together. If you didn't have the directions, you're pretty much screwed. And it's a whole nother, and that's with you having all of the parts already made before you even account for how do you make the parts. It's very interesting. Now, before we wrap up this section and get into the next topic, you stated this pretty clearly, I thought, in one of your summation videos, but are you calling for a total cessation of origin of life research, or an audit? Like, what are you actually calling for in relation to how things should be approached going forward, from the funding aspect and different, just the approach and the mindset that's being put forth towards?
I've never called for that. People say that. That's just like when people say that Tour says we'll never have a solution. I have been very specific. I said, I can never say we'll never have a solution to the origin of life. How can I say that as a scientist? Maybe in 100 years, maybe in 1,000 years, but I can say we're nowhere close today. As far as other things like a cessation, I've never called for a cessation. I've called for a moratorium. I've called for a timeout or a moratorium to step back and say, okay, what are the key problems that need to be addressed to say that we're making progress on this origin of life thing? Because just making more molecules like this that have very little relevance through your relay syntheses and things to an early Earth isn't getting us anywhere. That's a waste of money. That's what I'm talking about. So I've never called for cessation. I've called for a moratorium, which is a temporary timeout for a reassessment. This is done in other fields. I mean, sometimes DARPA will come with a program and they'll say, look, enough of the way we're going. We're not solving this thing. We want only new ideas here, only new ideas. And through this, they bring in a lot of young people to bring up ideas, and they sift out the old people that have not solved this. And it's called a DARPA hard problem, and they solve this. Well, why not do that with something like this rather than spending all this money and continuing to get the same bunch of junk? That's what I've called for. So again, people quote me wrongly all the time.
Well, thank you very much for issuing the clarification on that, because that is a very heavily repeated talking point that I've heard. So thank you very much for clarifying that.
One other comment on this section.
Of course.
One other comment. So let me confess some past mistakes. And I've already written about this and posted this. When I was giving a video in a YouTube in Dallas, I didn't even have control of my slides. They couldn't get my slides working. It was a mess. So I gave this video and I said, look what Jack Szostak has shown. He's lying to you. Now, those words lying are very strong words because that speaks intent. The data that he showed was wrong. So Jack and I spoke, I don't know, a few weeks after that. And I said, Jack, I'm sorry for saying I lied to you. Please forgive me. He says, forgiven. I mean, it's just like that. Some people have claimed that I was forced to apologize to Jack Szostak. Who would force me? Who would force me? I mean, there is no governing body that forces Jim Tour to apologize to anybody. I apologized to him on my own. And because I used those words. And then somebody pointed out that on one of the videos within this series on the NASA thing, when I was talking about the work that was done at NASA from making this tiny little molecule and suggesting that that had any relevance to an origin of life and showing thing, that I said, this is a lie. Again, I used that terminology, and I'm apologizing for that too. I shouldn't have said that. And on this whole information question, I mean, people have talked about, I think maybe you were going to talk about information more, but you're not going to get the information, the specified information, but maybe we'll address that later. So those are the few little things that I wanted to address and to say, and just apologize to those folks at NASA, because I shouldn't have used the terminology lying. I should have just said you're wrong. And that's mostly what I tried to say. So anyway, yeah, it was a misspeak. So please forgive me, NASA.
Well, Dr. Tour, I guess we'll just have to hold you accountable for being human. It's a very high standard. All right, folks, don't go away. We're going to be getting into some specifics. And then last but not least, and you won't want to miss this, we will be getting into the fun and frivolity that has been derived from all of the comments that have been left on the lecture series on abiogenesis.